Aloha guys, this is Dr. Tom coming at you once again. Today's fascinating discussion is the skeleton, the skin, and regulating body temperature. It's chapter 15 is the skeletal system. Again, Dr. Waya, guys, and myself have modified these some so they'll match up with the A&P course since you're taking them simultaneously, so much the better. Okay, the skeletal system is a system of bones and joints in the body. Bones are structural support protection of internal organs, joints where bones come together. Tendons connect muscles to bones, like the Achilles tendon in the back of the foot. Ligaments link bones to bones. That's important to know. Physicians associated with skeletal system. Orthopedist is one of the medical specialties. It's kind of if you have a broken bone or something, that's who you'd see. Rheumatologist for joint problems, MD. Physiatrists are actually quite kind of rare, but they're doctors who specialize in physical therapy. Osteopathic physicians is an alternative to a medical doctor. They do the same thing, but they have a DO degree, a doctor of osteopathy, instead of an MD degree. Bone formation. Ossification is changing cartilage into bone. When babies are born, guys, they have a lot of the skeleton that's cartilaginous, and it has to ossify into bone throughout childhood. Osteoblasts are immature bone cells. Osteocyte, of course, is a bone cell. Osteoclasts break bones down. Osteoblasts build them up. Why? Because bone is constantly remodeling itself in the body, guys. The skeleton is a source of calcium. Important mineral. The blood levels of calcium has to be kept in a narrow range, 9 to 11 milligrams percent, in case you were wondering. And besides our diet, the bone is a big storehouse of calcium, and calcium also is and phosphorus are what makes bone strong. Okay, a long bone, the shaft of it's called the diaphysis. The ends of it are called the epiphysis. There's a transitional portion called the metaphysis, which is the middle portion. And at the end of the long bones, we'll see a drawing in the next slide. It's called an epiphyseal line or plate. It's the growth plate which allows the bones to grow longer until the skeleton is entirely mature. Okay, here's the thigh bone, the femur. So here's the diaphysis. Here's the metaphysis. And the end is called the epiphysis on both ends. We have cartilage here. This blue is hyaline cartilage. Inside is a canal. This is where bone marrow is. Bone marrow is what makes the blood cells. Very important. Here they're showing some of the internal structure. Don't worry about this, guys. You're going to have it in A&P like it says here. Just become familiar with the basic terms. Ends of bones are covered by cartilage. Chondro is the root word for cartilage. Cushions the joint, allows it to move smoothly. There's hard, compact bone, and there's cancellous or spongy bone. It looks sort of like Swiss cheese. Within these cavities is where bone marrow is, but also as it removes some of the additional weight, it's still strong, but we don't have this additional bone where we don't really need it. Okay, we have marrow in the bones. In an adult, most of the marrow is yellow, which is inactive fat material. Red bone marrow is where the blood cells are formed. And that term is called hematopoiesis, process of making blood cells. You need to know that word, hematopoiesis. All blood cells, all of them, there are 3 different kinds, are made in the red bone marrow. Because later in A&P, the book is a little bit confusing on some of that. Okay, you're going to get this in anatomy. Let me just say, every bulge, every crack, every hole, every fissure, every knob has a name in a bone. And that's what they're showing here. Again, you'll have this in A&P. Here's the cranial bones. You'll have this in A&P. But just become familiar with them. Frontal, 2 parietal bones, 2 temporal bones, and an occipital bone in the back. There's also some others, sphenoid and ethmoid. But again, you'll study that there. Facial bones. The bone that has the teeth is called the mandible. They say mandibular bone. It should say mandible. The bone that contains the upper teeth is called the maxilla. It should also say maxilla. You'll learn this in A&P, so I'm going to skip over it. Nasal bones, lacrimal bones, up by the eyes, maxilla. Should say bone, there's only one. And I would not use this adverb, adjective form, whatever the hell it is. Same with this. Okay, we know we have sinuses. There are frontal sinuses and maxillary sinuses here, but then that's the ones that people typically have problems with, with sinusitis and so forth. But there's also ethmoid and sphenoid sinuses too, in those other bones. Air cavities. Vertebral column, we've gone over that before. 7 cervical vertebrae, 12 thoracic, 5 lumbar, the sacrum, and the little coccyx. The spine should curve like this when it's viewed from a lateral view. When it's viewed from an A to P view or a posterior, should be straight. Okay, we just went over this. The intervertebral discs are between the vertebrae. There's one between all of them except C1 and the occipital bone of the skull. Bones of the thorax, pelvis, extremities. Don't worry about it right now because you'll be getting that. But read over. If it were me, I would sit here and when I'm studying, I would read these, and then you'll go over them in detail in anatomy. Okay, bones of the thorax, the clavicle is the collarbone, scapula, shoulder blade, sternum is breastbone, ribs. These are the structures in arm, hand, and pelvis. The pelvic bones, guys, are made of these 3 bones, ilium, ischium, and pubis, and to 2 big, huge, stout, very strong bones that function as a single bone. Bones of the leg and foot, associated structure. Femur is the thigh bone. Kneecap's called the patella. Tibia is the shin bone. Fibula is the little small bone on the lateral to the tibia. Tarsal is the heel bone. Metatarsal is phalanges. You'll go over those, and here's pictures of all that. These bones all have names, like the calcaneus is the heel bone. These metatarsals are just numbered 1 through 5. And then the little toe bones are just identified. They don't have individual names. They're called phalanges, and they're designated by their position and number. Okay, calcio. Calcio means calcium, the mineral. Kypho is a posterior curvature in the thoracic spine. We're supposed to have it there. If it's too advanced, it's what we know as a hunchback. Lamina is part of the vertebra. Lordo is a curve in the lumbar spine. Lumbar is the low back. Myelo means bone marrow. It also means spinal cord. Ortho means straight, like an orthodontist. You get braces put on your teeth. Osteo means bone. Scolio means crooked. You may have heard of scoliosis. It's common in teenage girls. Look at the spine from the rear, and it has a curve when it should be. Now, guys, remember, when you see it from a lateral view, it should have curves. But when you see it from a straight front or back view, it should not. Spondylo is one of the words for vertebrae, and vertebral, of course, is too. Blast, embryonic cell, like osteoblasts make bone. Clasp, break it down. Listhesis is slipping. The only example of that I can give you is spondylolisthesis, where a vertebra slides forward. I don't want to get into all that. Malacia, softening, we mentioned that. Physis is to grow. Porosis is pore, or like osteoporosis. There's holes in it. There's not enough minerals. Tome, to cut. Okay. The hip socket is called the acetabulum. It's acetabulo. Calcaneus is a heel bone. This is misspelled. It should be H-E-E-L. Carpo are the wrist bones, the carpals. Go over those in A and P. Clavicle is the collarbones. Costo is the root word for ribs. Costo, not Costco, that's a store you go to. Cranio is the cranium, the skull. Femoral is the femur, the biggest bone in the body is the thigh bone femur. Fibula is the little small leg bone, lateral to the tibia. Humerus is the arm bone, the upper arm. Ilio and ischio make up the pelvic bones. Malleolus is it's actually a bump in the bones. Mandible is the jawbone. Maxilla is the upper jawbone. Metacarpals are the bones in your hand. There are 5 of them. They're just numbered. They don't have names. Metatarsals are the ones in the foot. Olecranon process is part of the elbow. Patella is the kneecap, pelvi, pelvis. Peroneal fibula. Yeah, that's a fairly uncommon word. Phalanges are the toes and finger bones. Guys, once you learn the arm or the leg, you pretty much got them both because there's a lot of similarities. In the wrist, they're called carpal bones. In the ankle, they're called tarsal bones. But then there's metacarpals and metatarsals. Phalanges are the same in both. So when you learn one, you've kind of learned the other too. See, pubic bone, radius is the bone on the thumb side of the forearm. Scapula is shoulder blades. Sterno is the breastbone, the sternum. Tarsals are the ankle bones. Tibia is the shin bone. Ulna is the lower arm bone. We got two bones in the lower arm, the forearm. The one on the thumb side is the radius. The one on the little finger side is the ulna. You've already learned every major bone in the body. Vocabulary, following vocabulary slides, learn more detail in A&P. Okay. Acetabulum, again, is the hip joint. Acromion process is up here. It forms part of the shoulder joint. It's part of the scapula. Bone, hard connective tissue composing the skeleton. Bone depression, opening or hollow region. There's a lot. For example, the skull, guys, has over 100 openings in it. I didn't believe that until I had it in school. It does. Bone process is an enlarged or a bony area for muscle and tendon attachment. Calcium, we've mentioned that 3 times now. Cancellous or spongy or porous bone, like Swiss cheese. Cartilage, flexible connective tissue. Our nose, our ears, our part of our ribs. Many other places have cartilage. Collagen is the most common connective tissue in the body. Dense connective tissue, protein strands. Compact is the hard bone. Cranial bones, we went over those. Frontal, parietal, temporal, occipital, ethmoid, and sphenoid. So you didn't think I knew. Diaphysis is the shaft of a long bone. Discs is the fibrocartilage pads between the spine, between the vertebrae of the spine. Epiphyseal plate, cartilaginous area at the ends of long bones where lengthwise growth takes place in the immature skeleton. If you have an excessive amount of growth hormone produced, guys, as a child, you can grow up to be a giant. If it happens after your skeleton is mature in the early 20s, you have the one we had in the last slide, acromegaly. Epiphysis, the ends of the long bones. Facial bones, we went over some of those. Fontanelle, this is the soft spot in an infant's head. The cranial bones, guys, have not fully fused in an infant or a child. And it's good because it gives flexibility during the birthing process and stuff. The bone at the back of the skull is called the occipital bone. It has a big hole called the foramen magnum. That's the hole the spinal cord leaves the brain and goes down through. Reversion canals are found in bone. Ligament, remember, connects bone to bone. Malleolus is around bony processes on either side of the ankle joint. Manubrium, the breastbone, the sternum has 3 parts: manubrium, body, and xiphoid process. The manubrium is the top part. Mastoid process are these bony areas behind the ears, part of the temporal bone. Medullary cavity is a hollow port where there is bone marrow. Metaphysis. Flared portion of long bone between the diaphysis and epiphyseal plates. Metaphysis, that's how it's pronounced. Olecranon process is part of the elbow. Orthopedist, medical doctor who specializes in these kinds of problems. Osseous tissue is another word for bone. Ossification is the process of bone formation, usually from cartilage, but it can be otherwise. We already mentioned all these. Blasts build. How do you remember that? Blasts build. Blasts build. Blasts build. Class tear down. Why bone is constantly remodeling itself throughout our lifetime. That's why cowboys get bow-legged. Periosteum is the membrane surrounding bone. We haven't mentioned that yet. Very important. It's a vital membrane surrounding bone. Periosteum. Phosphorus, an important mineral for bone. Physiatrist, medical doctor, specializes in therapy and rehabilitation. Pubic symphysis is in the front where the pelvic bones come together. Red bone marrow found in cancellous or spongy bone, site of hematopoiesis. Ribs, we've got 12 pairs of ribs. I'm not going to go over all these. It depends on whether they're attached to bone in the front as they're true ribs or false ribs. Scoliosis is depression sphenoid bone where the pituitary gland is. But you probably don't know what the pituitary gland is, but you will. So time's almost up.